I'm Lady J.
I'm Alec, and we're both Portland State University students.
And within the school, there are university studies goals of communication, diversity, equity, and social justice, ethics and social responsibility, and inquiry and critical thinking. And we are going to be discussing critical thinking today.
So one of our conceptions, actually the broadest conception of what critical thinking and inquiry really entails, is that traditionally it's conceived of as a set of mechanical tools, like what are logical fallacies, where can you identify them, what are the structures of arguments, things of this nature, and those are all really, really helpful. But one of the things that we've discovered through critical thinking and inquiry is that relationships are actually very foundational. Like, they can help or inhibit how well we can do critical thinking together. And that's precisely because we do it together within a university setting.
And in order to make a stable relationship, emotional stability personally is necessary. And we are sort of setting out to define critical thinking a little more expansively and explore why it is defined in terms of rational mechanics only traditionally, and why that is at a disadvantage for us to conceptualize critical thinking just in terms of mechanical, rational, logical, and how the rational and the emotional must work together to create critical thinking or connective tissue between ideas and thoughts and feelings, because it's all in there. It's all in our head.
So either we're going to have this broader rather than narrow view of critical thinking, or we're not. And we're arguing that essentially if we do have a broader sense of not just critical thinking, but what goes into it, what conditions it, what affects it, what helps us or hinders us,
Yes.
then we're actually going to end up doing critical thinking in the university setting a whole lot better.
As we were just discussing, there is more to critical thinking than pure rational thought. It is also the emotional aspect. I set this up here to look like a Venn diagram to help think about the place where these meet as critical thinking, and also to sort of provide a visual to consider the weight, because while rational is tended to be thought of as pretty straightforward, emotional is a lot heavier and deeper and unpredictable, and for that reason it carries more weight in an interaction. And this weight makes the importance of personal calibration in terms of emotional stability a precursor to actually engaging in rational discussion. And in some situations, this is done for us.
So what might feel very strange and foreign about this perhaps non-traditional conception of critical thinking is that when we normally talk about critical thinking in university studies, colleges, professors talk about these things, they're talking, like I said in the introduction, about these very specific tools. And they're doing it because the code of conduct has already established certain emotional, just acceptable behaviors and these sorts of things, so that the students don't have to think about it. They've accepted these things, they know what it is, and they can come to class prepared, acting like adults, and that we don't have to, start from ground zero, establishing what's acceptable behavior, what's respectable, how we're going to treat each other. These things are established by the code of conduct, so that when we enter in these spaces, we can just begin here. And because of that, we very frequently forget that this is a part.
Because the weight is removed. The weight is off. And it is something that, because we are not explicitly acknowledging it on a regular basis in this kind of a format, we kind of take it for granted. And yet when we look at how critical thinking plays out interpersonally, socially, it can start to be a little bit more apparent because instead of a code of conduct, it's social norms. And not everyone's social norms are the same way that everyone's code of conduct is the same. And it is this sort of dissection that allows us to take a closer look at what is rational and what is emotional and how do these pieces play into critical thinking, which is ultimately meant to be a connected function, especially within the university setting.
Absolutely. And maybe you're talking about hot topic issues that need to be talked about within facilitated spaces like university, but even though we try our best to, establish a stable framework, we still have these difficulties, right? And so it's an ongoing process, trying to maintain that stasis between people and to manage those spaces.
In particular, I think what I'm hearing you say is that first of all, we have conflict about what we care about, and so if we're really invested in what we're learning and how we're living our lives, then we're going to have conflict about it. It is inevitable. And critical thinking is how we get through and come to a place where both people's voices are out in the air and we're connecting about like, oh, that's your perspective, this is how mine is different, and this is how we can come together and not get into a place where I feel rejected by you, or you feel rejected by me, or something, because you aren't hearing my voice. I feel unheard, and that is what makes the rational area potentially corrupted. When the emotional is so strong that it interferes with the ability to accurately see the mechanics of reason.
Right. So if we're two students and we're in a, let's just say, a critical thinking course or a philosophy of ethics course or something like this, where very foreseeably we're going to be talking about how the rubber hits the road, where we see these ethical issues show up. And well, let's just say we talk about something like abortion, and I maybe say something that I'm just trying to understand, but I say something that offends you, and
or hits on something I feel strong about because I'm a woman and access to abortion is an important health care access right that is being potentially threatened, and for sure threatened in other places besides Portland, Oregon. And that is something that could just get me, like, I'm already feeling it a little right now.
Absolutely. And so, if maybe this is, I'm let's just say, a freshman, and this is my first time in a philosophy setting and so forth, and I'm just trying my best, but I said something that maybe I didn't think all the way through, or maybe this is just my first time having critical thinking with somebody about an issue that I didn't think to myself, is my perspective limited in some fashion? No, I didn't consider that. And so, to get back to the point here, we're having this, rational discourse, but at some point, this, this emotional stability becomes threatened, and then all of a sudden, even though I'm sincerely trying to understand you, or maybe help you to understand me, all of a sudden, like you said, that rational component is, has been corrupted. And now you're thinking, this person is just trying to belittle me or something like this.
And it's further corrupted when I am in a place of not necessarily instability, but of just heightened emotion, to where maybe the way that I come at you, like, what are you trying to say? I'm trying to say it casually, but I'm just like, come on, dude, don't you read the freaking news? Don't you understand, like, right? I'm thinking that, it comes out in my tone, and then suddenly we're like magnets being repelled, and it's probably going to be a thing for the rest of the term.
Yeah. Exactly, and this is how these dynamics are shaped and sometimes maintained.
Yeah.
Because if we're only ever talking about philosophical issues, and now all of a sudden we have an emotional issue, where do we handle that? And this is what we're talking about.
All right, so things, as we just illustrated, things can get a little heated when it comes to even a structured sort of space where there is a code of conduct, but we are discussing something that is very emotionally tense, which in the example we just sort of illustrated, that was abortion within the context of an ethics class in philosophy. This is a real world scenario that happens, and it's sort of, it illustrates how important emotion is. And so I want to drill into that a little bit more with looking at emotion in terms of acceptance and rejection, because often those are the two knowns when we feel like, okay, I recognize acceptance, I recognize rejection, but what about this gray area in between where I'm actually not sure if you're accepting or rejecting me, or if I want to accept or reject the idea that you're saying or where you're coming from. It's just this gray area of what, and so then what are my choices? I can go with what I know and make assumptions, which is not a connective choice, or I can sort of make space for your ideas and values and hear from you more, ask you questions, sort of an elicitive process where I invite you to share more of your perspective with me without holding judgment or stopping you to be like, because really I need to hear you out in order to know.
Right. And so maybe we get to a place where she's clarified and I have a perspective that she fundamentally disagrees with and is, convinced that's just wrong. Let me make sure that I understand, okay, is this what you're saying? Yes, it is. I'd like to challenge that. You know what I mean? And we do that within the structure of, facilitated conversations. And so as much as, hot button issues has, they have this acceptance and rejection on an emotional level happening within them, there is also a sense of rational acceptance and rejection happening, right? We're debating the content of an issue, but we're also sort of struggling to, handle our own emotions and then handle, the interactions that we're having. So this is a map that we're, illustrating in order to see the basic dimensions here. This is imperfect. It's not as rigid as it appears, but we've sort of simplified it for the sake of illustrating, right? So we have emotional acceptance and rejection, and we have that happening on a rational level as well.
Right, and so this is sort of what happens when you cross the acceptance and rejection feeling with an emotional or a rational perspective, and which of these conditions promote connecting.
Let's say we've had a couple classes together, and on an emotional level, I trust that this person is being sincere in their interactions. I trust that even when they're challenging me, they've proven in their interactions that they're genuinely trying to build an understanding. So we have this emotional acceptance between each other, which basically just amounts to we're friends, something like that, right? And on a, if we're having some kind of conflict, I think you're just trying to troll me. You keep, doing this, and I don't think that your criticism is coming from a sincere place. I really just think you're trying to belittle me.
And I'm like, well, he just doesn't even care about the truth, right? We come up with individual sort of thoughts to explain why the other person isn't meeting us, and that results in...
We have some kind of conflict. On a rational level, we're of course debating issues, right? On a purely rational level, math is a good example, right? Like 2 + 2 is 4. I accept the validity of that claim. That's true. Or, you know what, I think your math is wrong. And for the most part, there's not going to really be any kind of personal qualm, unless maybe there is a history and all of a sudden, like, you just think you're the better mathematician or something like that. But on a purely rational level, and so notice the way sometimes emotions come into play, but on a purely rational level, you have simple, I accept that, I think there's been a misunderstanding,
Or I don't agree with that assertion, right? And that, again, can become a place of inquiry where we can try to figure it out. Or we can just mutually agree, like, and it's okay if we disagree. It's actually, that's fine. And so what it turns into is that this space And this space, as long as we are able to sort of maintain in these areas of interaction, and not come to a place where we have a story in our heads that we are being emotionally rejected and therefore must reject the person and everything that they're saying.
So, real world scenario here, we're still debating, abortion or something like this. And let's say I trust that even though we have different opinions, you really want to understand me, I really want to understand you. We're trying to help each other, right? And so, we pose these questions to each other. How in the world do you think this? No, I'm not being flippant when I say that. I'm being sincere. I want to know what it's like to be raised in such a way that you, now being a grown woman, grown man, grown person, have these beliefs. And so we begin from the sincere place, and then we work, whether we agree or disagree on a rational level, we work through that. What we don't want to have happen is, you're trolling me. I don't care what you were saying. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. It doesn't matter because I don't trust you, right? That's what we're trying to avoid by maintaining our emotional relationship.
Exactly. Like when we have an experience, there's so many different perspectives and angles to come at it that oftentimes we are talking about having an experience about the same thing, that we just came at it from different angles, and now suddenly we're disagreeing when really we could be sharing our perspectives and expanding our own perception of how the world is by learning more about someone else's experience with something. And instead, the difference of experience becomes the reason why we suddenly don't trust each other, because, well, if you haven't had the same experiences that I have, then how do I know if I trust you? That needs to be turned around and be like, oh, I'm going to inquire more.
Right, we can talk about our common framework, for example, is on policy, and we can approach those public issues, with the public utility of rationality and critical thinking, but we do so from probably different emotional standpoints, because we've had different upbringings, not just because of where we were raised in this country, for example, but as a female and as a male, that's just going to be the case to a large degree. Not completely, right? We can still have the same common ground of understanding in order to acknowledge what are the implications of a policy that would be this way or another way.
And so to honor all of the intersections that are existent in both our lives and are available in the world, we need this sort of a framework for navigating our interactions, so that when we are creating something like rational public policy, we're factoring in not only ourselves and our own experience, but the fact that there are people with completely opposite experiences who maybe don't feel like they can come to a space of inquiry because it's turned into an acceptance or rejection, like this space, like, well, you're different than me, and so I don't trust what you're saying, when that there's no place for that in a public discussion about public policies.
Right, there will be difficult content to work through, but the way that we handle that makes all the difference. And we're not saying that any of this is easy, right? It's so much easier said than done. But to that point, it is a lot easier to do even the difficult when we have a clear sense of what it is that we are trying to do.
Yes, yes.